PlayStation has entered the ring with an all-time great new 3D platformer, or at least expanded on their previous entry. Is it better than the titular 3D Super Mario series? Everyone is drawing similarities to Super Mario Galaxy, but today we're throwing the hat in the ring against Super Mario Odyssey. We've got a lot of ground to cover, but if you can think of any other verse matchups, well, let me know down in the comments below. And of course, who are you picking? Bot or Plumber? Let's get started. Designing a platformer all around PlayStation characters and the iconography is a choice that some people think will grow stale. We've got handfuls of IPs here that have been locked up in the PlayStation vault that I don't know if they're going to ever reanimate to give us a new entry. Some of that nostalgia might be a bit more melancholy when you're collecting these various bots, and there is a heavy reliance of collecting parts of the PS5 using the controller. It's all a big branding celebration mixed in with nostalgia of past games and consoles. It straddles the line, being a bit too much in some cases, but it's also a uniquely defining character of this particular platformer. We did have Sackboy that came before, but no game from my memory has gone this far into an IP, unless maybe you consider Super Smash Bros. Knowing their last game was a celebration, a tour guide of the console itself, I don't know how much further you can take this concept, but nostalgia isn't only reserved for Astro Bot. I mean, look at this. Obviously, they're pulling at the heartstrings with Super Mario 64, and a really cool connection with Super Mario 64 is this. Water levels unite, Super Mario 64, same freaking order. When I saw this, I just instinctively knew that was going to be the code, and it became true. So awesome. So just because Astro Bot is playing to the strengths of the PlayStation IP doesn't mean that Mario itself is not. We have an entire section in the main storyline dedicated to Mario's beginnings, and we have plenty of times in this game where you're going into a pipe and going across a wall and you're becoming the 8-bit version of Mario. It's just a giant heaping of nostalgia for gamers that have had Mario in their life for a long, long time. There's so much nostalgia baked into Super Mario Odyssey that is one of the reasons I was grinning basically the entire time I played it during its initial launch. Now, it differs a little bit in its nostalgia is that it's referencing itself and other games within the Mario universe versus a brand in a collection of games that may or not have any through line to the origin of the game you're playing. I personally prefer Odyssey's nostalgia, but I also don't mind Astro's either. I think it can be a strength of that game because it is different. I think Odyssey and Mario's design in itself is basically everlasting if done with some restraint, which even with the multitude of 8-bit sections and the N64 love, there's still plenty of the game that is not tied to nostalgia. Astro's is a bit more disjointed. I think that there will be some players that there's a line that they won't cross where it just becomes tiresome and maybe even irksome, and I think my older brother might be one of those. But I will say I was gleefully happy entering into the Ape Escape world. That hit me in my childhood so much. So yes, nostalgia sometimes wins me over. Okay, it almost always does, but moving on. This is a section where Mario truly does have a competitor, and that is when you're looking at the boss battles. Even though outside of the brutal battles, I do find Odyssey does have a decent variety of bosses this go around. Whether it's the UFO fight or the major Bowser fights, Mario games generally have struggled to make boss fights engaging, or at least not predictable. The actions are fun because moving Mario is always fun, but the cadence and what you're doing can be a bit uninspiring at times. There are snippets of boss battle moments that work really well. I do love the concept of throwing Bowser into spiky balls back in the N64 days. It was simple, but it was a fresh take for it back then. Another example is the Andros boss battle, the pyramid head in this one with the rocket gauntlets. And I like the small twist on this where you capture the gauntlet and fly it back into the head. That little change-up makes that fight a little bit more entertaining. Now, Astro Bot has turned a lot of their boss fights into set pieces, which I think is a smart choice. The boss design themselves is nothing to write home about. I mean, they're very generic looking, which is a complaint about all the enemy designs overall. But there's enough stimuli in the arenas to really up the ante of awesomeness. They really went with the pairing a gadget and using it on the boss fight. Now, I can say that is a take it or leave it choice for me. Sometimes when I have a really good power-up suit, I'm happy when I'm in that, especially the VR goggle ones. Oh my gosh, it's so much fun. Having the sea part when you're fighting the octopus and you have to do some platform to get over to the boss, those are some of the best parts of these boss fights. Again, not a fan of the look, but the arena itself, that's the next kind of evolution of 3D boss battles in a platformer that I want to see. And well, I think they rely on the suit attachments for these boss battles because Astro Bot doesn't do much besides these gadgets. Now, when I say he doesn't do much, he's still got some cool staple moves. Astro has a great laser hover jump, and he feels great when you're walking around on the sticks. Easy to control, and easy to maneuver around the various levels. Rarely is the platforming about precision or hectic timing. I know there are time trials, so we'll get there, but it's more of exploration and looking in every nook and cranny for bots, coins, and just fun little creatures that inhabit the world. And I have no complaints, absolutely nothing wrong with how Astro controls. It feels great. Honestly, the only negative is if you compare it to Mario, which you don't have to, but this video is about that particular thing, so I have to. And I don't think it's that Mario controls better. I mean, he probably does, but it's distractive to the argument when all you have to say is, well, Mario has a plethora of more options. Triple jumps, sideways vaults, the long jump. Gosh, the long jump is so good. I don't know how that became so satisfying to do ever since 64, but it has, and it's so good. And with Odyssey's inclusion of Cappy really lets loose some of the traversal. Being able to jump off Cappy into a dive is such a cool feature. And on top of that, you get power-up mechanics, kind of like Astro suits from the enemies you possess, which, man, the more I am removed from this concept and looking back on it, the more ridiculous it just all sounds. Good job, Nintendo, for just going absolutely weird. I do miss Mario's punch and kicks from N64, but at least Astro has the punches, but let me be able to punch somebody again. Where the real difference crops up, minus the plethora of options, it's the infusion of the levels become more of playgrounds of movement and exploration, where Astro most of the time is only about exploring. Now, this is just me, but I tend to lean towards more open concept levels in a 3D game versus an open space with 1 to 3 lanes of choice that loop back to one another. Astro Bot is definitely more Spyro the Dragon-like to me, more so than the open 3D Mario innovations, or maybe even more like Super Mario Galaxy. Personal bias aside, there are bonuses to the style that Astro Bot has. You can have more levels, which means you can get really wacky and switch the tones quickly, whereas the bigger levels for Odyssey, for the most part, have to stick to a theme. And knowing this, you're going to get more variety in Astro Bot because, well, you've got more levels, it's pretty simple, and you can do the more 2D Mario style where they introduce a mechanic early and then build upon it much later. And that's always a fun thing when you revisit an old power-up. Or adding one more layer to a concept of a level's theme. And with more levels, you have the potential to have a variety of standout levels. And in Mario's case, if you have a couple lackluster kingdoms, which I think it kind of does, it takes a bigger toll on the overall experience. If I'm not feeling a level in Astro Bot, well, I'll be done with it in a handful of minutes. The upside for Odyssey is if you have a stellar level design, it's going to be so much fun to stay in that world. And I think Odyssey does have some stellar level design. Whether it's following a trail of flowers in the sky, soaring across the waters in Seaside Kingdom, or making buildings your playground, there are moments scattered throughout these levels, but more importantly, there's a lot that has to do with player agency and how you tackle them, especially the latter with the scaling of buildings in Metro Kingdom. Astro Bot has amazing cool moments, but for the most part, it's a more passive experience, and that's a weird way to word it, but when you're talking about the movement, Astro Bot can't do much. That isn't a bad thing, mind you, just different, and it might not be everyone's go-to when thinking about platforming fun. And the flip side of that, of course, is somebody would look at Super Mario Odyssey and realize half of these kingdoms aren't my thing. I'd rather play Astro Bot, which has way more levels. One thing that strikes me with Super Mario Odyssey as I've gone back to it is the dichotomy towards the finale of Odyssey, the Moon Kingdom, everything just being so wacky and zany. And then you have this level where you float across it in almost a barren yet majestic world. I thought that was actually really brilliant. Not my favorite kingdom, but a pleasant way to settle into the ending. Another big strength of Astro Bot is the feel and look of the world surrounding Astro Bot. Knowing that vibrant pink grass and open blue skies can exist beside space-themed levels and caves, I feel Astro Bot puts its best foot forward when it's got the soaring vistas in the background and you're focusing on one type of traversal. So for instance, when you're in Balloon Breeze and you're floating up higher and higher above the vibrant plants, then you have, the big old robot in the background coming out of the clouds. So you're doing something, floating up, but you also have something cool in the background. And of course, using the slow-mo watch and freezing everything, dancing across cards or knives from spooky ghosts. That's not as vertical, but it's still got kind of the same concept. And of course, these levels have jam-packed with items. The amount of technology to render all these little bits and bobbles is so cool, whether it's jewels or little balls or whatever it is. It's really showing off the power of the PS5, and I think that's a very good boon for this game. Now, this sometimes can lead into the levels having slightly a bit of sheen, almost like a plastic sheen to them, but it's not as obvious, but it can be on the enemies themselves. But I think a nice change would be having the enemies be more revolving around the themes. Obviously, we have ghost enemies in the spooky ends. I want them to play that up even more. I touched on this a little bit, but Astro Bot follows a nice design philosophy of Mario, giving you the gadget or an aspect to the level and then waiting a long time for that to be repeated, with either a twist or a more difficult spin on it. And they do hold restraint where sometimes you get a gadget just for one level, and that's it. Super Mario Odyssey does this with more of its later game challenges and with its capture mechanics of upping the difficulty. Also, get good at platforming and herding sheep. That dumb sheep moon trying to get it into its pen, oh my gosh, that drove me nuts in the Wooded Kingdom. I'm not always drawn to 100% Mario games, but I do love when you finish this game and those new artifacts awaken, kind of made this mysteriousness come alive, and it gives you a sense of direction where you should be going for so many moons to collect. It's hard to compare the enemy designs of the Mario games to Astro Bot because at some point we probably thought Mario characters were generic, but it's kind of weird though. You put boots on a Koopa Troopa and it just works, and yeah, I don't know. But I was talking to my older brother about this, where the generic alien final bad guy has nothing on Bowser. Bowser's design is so freaking cool. Even if it's changed and evolved over the years, he's always been cool. And I would never put the label of generic on him, where the bosses in this game felt generic, and a lot of the enemies do too. And there are some quote-unquote generic enemies in Mario, but they just have a different flavor that just makes them a little bit more unique. And when I'm comparing final boss fights, the generic alien, fun fight, and I would say the final Bowser fight in Super Mario Odyssey is pretty good. I enjoyed the mechanics that they were throwing at you, and you kind of get the reverse of what Astro Bot did. Going into the final battle of Astro Bot, you had this gameplay change of shoot 'em up, getting to the final boss. In Odyssey, after you beat Bowser, then you get to take Bowser and do this escape sequence that's a lot different than what you've been doing. I would say controlling Bowser is the closest comparison we can get to Astro Bot taking over famous PlayStation IPs. So whether it's becoming Nathan Drake or a ball of local Roco. And I think this was a success almost all the way around. And I actually think them restraining it to just one level each time kind of was the smart choice, because I think this would have gotten a little too monotonous. Granted, I take that back because I would love more levels doing Ape Escape, because I just want another Ape Escape game. But that's just me. Obviously, it's not going to be the majority of people, but what a lot of people like in these games is the extra content. So do we want moons or do we want bots? There's a lot of bots and there's a lot of moons. The bots you'll be rescuing have a distinct personality, or at least a huge portion of them. They're still doing something unique when you find them. So knowing that they're distinct, that's already a better collectible overall than the moons. The moons do change colors, and that's cool. Simple color changes like that do a lot for me. I don't know why. In reality, I don't know how much more of an edge this gives Astro Bot, because at the end of the day, it's just another form of a collectible, which I do love. I align this with another Spyro reference, Reaching the Dragons, where they had a different design and a line of dialogue that they gave you. It was cool, but you just went on running to the next one to rescue. At the end of the day, you're just getting the collectible to go higher and higher. Odyssey just changes it because it's a lot more skill focus in general than Astro Bot. There are a few bots in the symbol challenges that can be a little bit harder to acquire, and that's a nice little ramp up in difficulty. But there's definitely no comparison that Odyssey has the more challenge, whether it's trying to perfectly long jump 10 times in a row while being chased by the Bullet Bill, or, yeah, there's just some sweaty palm-inducing parts of Odyssey. Oh, it's those sheep, man. And the final challenge level in Odyssey is pretty freaking tough. I would say Astro Bots was a pretty good challenge, too. I enjoyed it. I don't think either game is going to drive you up the wall in challenge. That lava duck part in Astro Bot, that was pretty rough. I did not like that. But to me, there's no contest where Odyssey's endgame is much more difficult. And if you value that, well, that's a pretty easy pick. But it wouldn't be anything if you didn't get any rewards for getting all these collectibles. You want to feast upon them. Nice part is both games give you outfits to wear. I like Odyssey more for the customization and the mix matching. I really wish you could do that a little bit more in Astro Bot. I just love being able to change my cap from my overalls. There's a decent variety in Astro Bot, but I mainly stuck to just my normal look, and in Odyssey, I really wanted to mix it up. But I would say Astro Bot wins out in the other element of having a field full of Astrobots, just being out there and being able to see them, interact with them, and just seeing what they're up to. Now, for me, I'm going to reference nostalgia, being able to enter the Mushroom Kingdom, see Peach's castle, wear a freaking outfit that makes me look like Super Mario 64. Yoshi's on top of the castle. He's on top of the castle. It hit me in the feels too much, so much. That's a wonderful reward tied to a very personal history with me that was absolutely incredible. So obviously that's going to have a little bit more weight on my end. Astro Bot has given us more bots and time trials. Odyssey has given us Luigi and balloon hunts. So both of these games have some things after launch, and more importantly though, they have a lot to offer when they first launched. To be able to get to the end game and get all these collectibles, you're going to have to get from level to level, and that can be as important or as trivial as you want it to be. Astro Bot has a balance between a hub world that doesn't totally connect with the level select screen and a level select system that lets you explore with a little bit more freedom than the older Super Mario Bros. Games did. It's an interesting choice, a little reminiscent of Galaxy 2, but better because it has a fleshed out hub world. I wish the secrets felt a little bit more rewarding. Most of the things you discover in the hub world are paired with bots, so you know they are going to do something and that something is going to unlock. I prefer a hub world where I explore and stumble upon something that takes me somewhere else, like God tier Super Mario 64 castle, for example. And by default, Astro Bot wins in this department because Odyssey just doesn't have a hub world. You have a tiny little ship that you can decorate, and that's cool, but please bring back a hub world on the next iteration, a really good one, a really thought out one, because it's cool chatting with Cappy on these comfy chairs, watching as the worlds go by through the window. But for me, it's just not enough. I mean, I don't have a choice. If I can't have my Super Mario 64 castle hub world, I'd rather have something similar to Astro Bots. And I do want to mention something because I don't think I did earlier. When talking about the enemy design and genericness versus not, and how Mario probably grew on us, but I mean, a walking chestnut's pretty interesting to me. I've had 4 experiences now with Astro Bot. We have Astro Bot Rescue Mission, the PSVR game, we have Astro's Playroom, and we have Astro Bot. That's plenty of times for me to grow on these enemy designs and variety, but I still don't. So, there you go. I don't think this is a controversial take, but music-wise, I think Astro Bot really does take the cake. I just love the singing robot voices. And knowing that they're mixed into the OST for certain levels, it just brings a certain charm to it, and it stands out and it feels even more unique than, say, Jump Up Superstar, which I really do love. It's just, I think it's that robotic angle that really throws in the nice bonus appeal. Super Mario Odyssey has a good soundtrack. There's a handful of tracks I really love, like Steam Gardens one. The Lake Lamode, New Donk City, and a couple that are good, a couple of greats, and a handful that are just kind of forgettable. It basically comes down to the standout tracks can't overtake the consistency of Astro Bot in my eye. So if I had to compare the top 3 kingdoms versus the top 3 levels, it would kind of go like this. Super Mario Odyssey, the best kingdoms are the Metro Kingdom, the Wooded Kingdom, and my favorite, Seaside Kingdom. Such a freaking good level. Oh my gosh. And if I'm looking at Astro Bot, it's Downsize Surprise. I can't remember the spooky level off the top of my head, but I'll put it right there. And my favorite, not by chance, but Bubbling Under, which maybe has some similar to Seaside Kingdom. Not really, but just a little bit of that sparkle. I love the domes and everything. Both of my favorite levels in both of the games are water levels. I would not have guessed that. There are plenty of other levels that I enjoy, and there's still other kingdoms I enjoy. But if I'm looking at these top 3, I would rather play all of the Super Mario Odyssey ones versus the Astro Bot ones, but these are still my favorite Astro Bot ones. So that's an interesting thought process. So where does it stand? Both are incredible games in their own right, and I think they are deserving of those 90-plus scores, but more importantly, they are given the worth your time, must-play moniker. I find myself drawn to Super Mario Odyssey more. What puts me there is the movement. Controlling Mario is more fun and exciting, and when it comes down to it, fun is the key ingredient when playing a platformer, and maybe most games. I also like more open-ended structures of the levels in Super Mario Odyssey versus Astro Bot. I mean, my favorite Astro Bot level is the more open-ended level. But I do have to reiterate, Astro Bot is an incredible game. Seriously, it's my favorite game that came out in 2024, so that's a very high bar. It's just not Super Mario Odyssey for me. But what about you? Team Blue or Team Red? Or maybe the mystery Team Yellow? Well, who is that? Let me know. If you like this, stick around. I'll take suggestions on another matchup you want to see, hopefully that you have typed down in the comments. But for now, a topic I did not cover about Super Mario Odyssey: are there too many moons?